Welcome back to the Deep Dive. I want to start today with a confession. I think most of us, myself included, have a very specific mental image when we hear the words science and religion in the same sentence.
Oh, I can guess. It's a boxing ring.
Exactly. It's the heavyweight championship.
Yeah.
In the blue corner, wearing the lab coat, you have science, all hard facts, data, and logic. In the red corner, wearing the robes, you have religion feelings, ancient books, and, faith. And the assumption is that these two are destined to just beat the living daylights out of each other until one of them is knocked out.
That is the popular narrative. It really is. It's the conflict thesis. Or if people are feeling, I guess, a bit more generous, they go with Stephen Jay Gould's idea of non-overlapping magisterium.
Noma, right.
Noma. Basically, science handles the how, religion handles the why, and they should stay in separate rooms and, never speak to each other.
Right. Stay in your lane. Don't cross the streams. But today, we are doing something a little different. We are looking at a paper by Finley I. Lawson titled Why Metaphysics Matters for the Science Theology Debate, an Incarnational Case Study.
It's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful, and honestly, when I first saw the title, I thought, metaphysics, isn't that just abstract navel-gazing? But the mission today is to go detailed and deep, because Lawson is arguing that these two fields, science and religion, they aren't enemies.
Not at all.
They're actually trying to solve the same puzzle.
They are. And to understand that, we have to look at the ground beneath their feet. That's what metaphysics is. It's not about crystals or reading palms.
Thank you for clarifying that.
In philosophy, metaphysics, and specifically a branch called ontology, is the study of the furniture of the universe. It asks a very simple but very profound question. What actually exists?
So physics studies how things move, but metaphysics studies what those things are. Is that a fair way to put it?
Precisely. It's the what is it-ness of reality.
Oh.
And Lawson's central thesis, the whole point of the paper, is that the reason science and theology fight so often is because they are using outdated maps of reality.
Outdated maps.
Yeah, they're shouting at each other based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what the furniture of the universe actually is.
And to prove this, Lawson doesn't pick an easy topic. He doesn't go for something low stakes. He goes straight for the jugular.
He really does.
He picks the Christian doctrine of the Incarnation. The idea that Jesus was fully God and fully human at the same time in the same person.
Which is the ultimate test case. I mean, you can't get more difficult than that, because if you look at that claim through the lens of classical science, think 17th century physics, it looks like nonsense. It just looks like a logical contradiction.
There's square circle.
Exactly, a married bachelor. But, and this is the big pivot in the paper, if you look at it through the lens of modern science, quantum physics, suddenly the conversation changes.
How so?
The contradiction might just disappear.
That is a massive claim. So, okay, we're going to break this down. We need to talk about the rules of engagement, what Lawson sets up first, then the problem, with the old physics, and then this mind-bending solution from quantum mechanics.
Let's do it.
All right. Section 1, the rules of engagement. Before we can even touch Jesus or quantum particles, Lawson lays down a very specific framework called critical realism. Now, I heard of realism. I see a table. The table is real. What makes it critical?
Right. So to understand critical realism, you have to position it between the two extremes that usually dominate this conversation. On one side, you have what's called naive realism.
Naive realism. That's the what you see is what you get school of thought, the common sense view.
Exactly. It's the assumption that my perception of the world is a perfect one-to-one mirror of reality. I see a brown, solid table. Therefore, reality itself consists of brown, solid objects. If I have a scientific theory about an atom, that theory is a literal photographic picture of the atom.
Which we know is risky, right? Because if you showed a 17th century scientist a virus, he wouldn't see it. He couldn't. So he'd say, it doesn't exist. His perception is limited.
Precisely. The world is more than our senses can grasp. So that's one extreme. On the other extreme, you have anti-realism or, total skepticism. This is the more postmodern view that says we can't know reality at all.
So everything is just a social construct.
Everything. Science isn't finding truth. It's just a language game we play that happens to build bridges. Theology is just projecting our feelings onto the clouds. There's no out there.
Okay, so naive realism says, I know everything perfectly, and anti-realism says, I can't know anything at all. They're polar opposites.
Correct. And critical realism is the grown-up middle ground. It's the synthesis. It says, okay, there is an objective reality out there. The world exists whether I'm looking at it or not. That's the realism part.
Got it. And the critical part, where does that come in?
The critical part is the humility. It says, however, my access to that reality is always mediated. It's indirect. I use models, I use symbols, I use maps.
Ian Barber, who was a giant in this field, put it beautifully. He said, "No theory is an exact description of the world.
The map is not the territory."
The map is not the territory." That's the mantra of the critical realist.
Oh, I really want to nail this down because it feels crucial to everything that follows. Think about the London Underground map. It's a classic example, right?
Perfect example.
If you look at that map, you see straight lines, bright colors, perfect 90-degree angles. It tells you exactly how to get from Victoria to King's Cross. It is true. It works.
It is functionally true, yes. It corresponds to reality in a way that gets you where you want to go.
But if you actually go down into the tunnels, they aren't straight. They curve and twist, they're dark and they're dirty, they have depth and smell and 100 years of history. The map leaves all of that out.
Of course, it has to.
And if you thought the London Underground was a series of colorful 2D lines, you'd be. You'd be completely wrong. You'd be a naive realist about the tube map. And Lawson is saying that science gives us a map. It calls something an atom or a gravitational field. Theology gives us a map. It calls something incarnation or grace. Both are trying to describe a deep, complex reality, but neither of them is the reality. They're models.
This makes so much sense. And it leads to another concept Lawson brings up from a philosopher named Roy Bhaskar, the stratified world.
Yes. Bhaskar is essential here. He argues that reality isn't flat. It's not just one thing. It's layered, like a cake. Or maybe an onion.
Layers. What kind of layers?
You have the physical layer at the bottom, atoms, quarks, forces, that's what physics studies. But above that, you have an emergent biological layer, cells, organisms, ecosystems.
Okay.
And above that, a psychological layer, consciousness, thoughts, emotions. And above that, a social layer, economics, politics, culture. And each layer is real. It has its own rules.
And the key insight here is that you can't use the tools of one layer to judge the other. You can't reduce them.
You can't. Imagine trying to explain the beauty of a Shakespeare sonnet using only the laws of particle physics.
You'd sound insane.
You could. You could describe the chemical composition of the ink on the page. You could calculate the atomic weight of the paper. You would have a complete physical description, but you would completely, utterly miss the poem.
Because the poem, its meaning and beauty, exists on a different stratum of reality. It's an emergent property of those physical marks.
Right. It's real, but it's not physical. So the theologian and the scientist aren't fighting over the same scrap of land. T.F. Torrance uses this lovely image of the shared bench.
Tell me about that.
Imagine a workbench. The theologian and the physicist are sitting side by side. They are looking at the same universe, this stratified, complex, beautiful reality, but they are examining different layers of it with different tools. One is using a microscope, the other is using, say, prayer and scripture, but they're both trying to understand what's real.
So, critical realism gives us what you might call ontological wiggle room. It implies that our scientific models, even the really, really good ones that build computers and send people to the moon, are still open to interpretation. They aren't final dogma.
Correct. They are the best maps we have of the physical layer. But there are other layers. And that opening, that humility, is where the dialogue begins. If science is a map, not a photograph, then theology can look at that map and ask, does this fit with what we know about God? Does this map leave room for other realities?
Okay, so we have our framework. We're being humble. We're critical realists. We respect the map, but we know it's not the ground. Now let's introduce the conflict, the central problem. Why is the incarnation such a headache?
To understand the headache, we have to look at the diagnosis. Lawson creates a really important distinction between two words we use all the time, mystery and paradox.
I feel like I use these interchangeably. It's a mystery to me why the car won't start, or it's a paradox. But for a philosopher, these are very, very different things.
Very different. A mystery is something that is true, but it exceeds our capacity to fully understand it. It's too big for our brains.
Okay, like what?
Think of the concept of infinity. You can use it in math. You know it's a real workable concept, but try to actually hold the concept of infinity in your human brain. You can't. You're too small. Your mind is finite.
So mystery is basically, I'm not smart enough or big enough to get this.
Right. It's a limit of the knower, not a flaw in the thing known. A paradox, however, is a logical contradiction. It's a square circle. It's a married bachelor. It's a statement like x equals 1 and x equals 2 at the same time. It's not just hard to understand. It violates the fundamental rules of logic. It cannot be true.
And for a long time, The incarnation Jesus as fully God and fully man has been treated as a paradox.
Yes. The formal definition from the Council of Chalcedon says Christ has two natures, human and divine, coexisting in one person. Now, list the attributes. God is infinite, man is finite. God is omnipotent, man is weak. God's eternal, man dies.
They seem mutually exclusive.
Logically, combining them seems like saying this object is simultaneously all white and all black. It feels like a straight-up contradiction.
And Lawson's goal here isn't to explain away the mystery. He wants to keep the awe, the reverence, but he wants to solve the paradox.
Exactly. He wants to show that it's not a logical contradiction. But to see why we think it's a contradiction, we have to go back in time. We have to look at the old physics. We have to talk about the Newtonian trap.
This is section 2, the problem. And this involves a huge historical shift from what the philosopher Charles Taylor calls the enchanted world to the disenchanted world. Can we unpack that? Because enchanted sounds like a Disney movie.
It does. It sounds like fairies and elves. But Taylor meant something much more structural, more metaphysical. In the pre-modern world, think medieval Europe, the boundary between the physical and the spiritual was porous. It leaked.
Give me an example of that. What does a leaky world look like?
Well, if you got sick, it wasn't just a biological event. It might be a demon, it might be a curse from a witch, it might be God's judgment for a sin you committed. The physical world was shot through with moral and spiritual forces.
So physical objects could be charged with spiritual power, like a holy relic or a cursed amulet.
Precisely. The meaning of things could directly affect the matter of things. In that world, a miracle God stepping in and changing something wasn't a violation of physics. It was just how the world worked. The boss was checking in on the shop floor.
Okay, so that's the enchanted world. Then what happens?
Then comes the scientific revolution,
Yeah.
17th century, and you have two figures who change everything, René Descartes and Isaac Newton. They fundamentally redraw the map of reality. Descartes splits reality into two completely distinct, non-overlapping substances, res cogitans, which is mind, thought, spirit.
The ghosty stuff.
The ghosty stuff. And res extensa, which is matter, body, physical extension in space.
This is dualism.
This is Cartesian dualism. Mind is one thing, matter is another. They're totally separate categories of being. Then Newton comes along and describes matter, res extensa, as a closed mechanical system. It's a clockwork universe. Every effect has a precise, measurable physical cause.
And this is where the trap snaps shut.
It is, because of a concept that becomes the absolute bedrock of classical physics, the causal closure of the physical.
Causal closure. Break that down for us.
It's a fancy way of saying that any physical event can only be caused by another physical event. If a billiard ball moves, it's because another ball hit it. Energy is transferred. And crucially, the total amount of energy and matter in the system stays the same. The law of conservation.
Right. You can't create or destroy energy, you just move it around.
Okay, so now imagine you are a soul in this dualistic view. You're a ghost, you have no mass, you have no energy, you are immaterial. Now, want to move your arm.
I'm going to pick up my coffee cup.
To pick up that cup, neurons in your brain have to fire. Muscles in your arm have to contract. That requires physical energy. A measurable amount of work has to be done. If your non-physical soul causes that physical arm to move, where did the energy for that movement come from? The ghost just magically injected new energy into the closed clockwork system of the universe.
It's breaking the law of conservation of energy.
Exactly. It's a physics violation. So under the rules of Newtonian physics, you are presented with a binary choice, an impossible choice. Choice A, materialism.
Which says?
There is no soul. There is no God. It's just the machine. Consciousness is an illusion produced by the brain. This solves the physics problem, but it completely kills religion.
Okay, that's not a great option for a theologian. What's choice B?
Choice B, dualism. The soul exists, but it cannot interact with the body without breaking the laws of physics. The ghost is trapped inside the machine. It can watch, but it can't touch. This is the infamous interaction problem.
And this just demolishes the incarnation.
It completely pulverizes it, because the incarnation is the ultimate interaction. B. Lefto, a philosopher of religion, puts it so starkly. He asks, how can something relevantly like a soul, that's God, become relevantly like a stone?
Relevantly like a stone. That's a brutal way to describe a human body.
But in Newtonian physics, that's what a body is. It's incredibly complex, biological clockwork, sure, but it's still just matter. It's a stone. So if God is pure spirit and Jesus is pure matter, And those two substances are mutually exclusive and can't interact without violating physics.
Then the incarnation is a category error. It's like trying to download a software program into a rock. It's not just difficult, it's logically impossible. It's a paradox.
Precisely. And so for hundreds of years, theology has been on the defensive. It's been contorting itself, trying to explain how a ghost could inhabit a machine without breaking the machine.
And Lawson's brilliant insight here is to just say, stop. Stop trying to solve the Newtonian problem.
Why?
Because Newton was wrong. Or at least his map was incomplete.
We aren't living in a clockwork universe anymore.
We haven't been for 100 years. We are living in a quantum universe. And that brings us to section 3, the pivot. This is where Lawson argues that our scientific ontology, our view of what actually exists, needs a massive update.
He calls the whole project meta-scientific.
What does he mean by that?
He means that scientific realism, the belief that science is describing a real world, is itself a metaphysical presupposition. You can't prove the world is real in a lab. You have to assume it in order to do the lab work.
You assume the map points to a real place before you start drawing it.
You have to. But the problem is, most of us, even many scientists when they're not in the lab, are operating on what he calls a folk narrative.
A folk narrative. I love that term. It sounds like a fairy tale you tell your kids.
It is, in a way. It's the common sense view of science that we absorb from culture. Host, be honest. When I say the word atom, what image pops into your head?
Oh, immediately I see the Jimmy Neutron symbol. A little cluster, balls in the middle, the nucleus, and then these little electron planets whizzing around in perfect, clean orbits.
Right. The solar system model. Tiny, hard, indestructible Lego bricks hitting each other in empty space.
Is that not true?
I mean, it's a useful model for high school chemistry. But is it a true picture of reality? Absolutely not. That is the Rutherford Bohr model from the early 1900s. We know now that atoms aren't hard little balls. Electrons aren't planets in fixed orbits. The furniture of the universe isn't made of Legos.
So if my entire theological argument is based on the idea that God can't be a Lego brick because he's a spirit, I'm fighting a straw man.
You are fighting a ghost. You are letting 17th century metaphysics dictate 21st century theology. Lawson says we need to stop arguing with Newton's ghost and look at what actual current physics tells us about the furniture of reality. And when we do that, things get very, very weird.
Detailed and deep, remember. Let's get weird. This brings us to section 4, the solution, part 1. Lawson introduces a scholar named H. Primus and this concept of quantum holism.
Yes. Now, holism is a word that gets thrown around a lot. You hear it in wellness circles. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. But Primus means something much, much more radical. He is suggesting that in a quantum universe, the parts might not even exist in the first place.
Whoa. Okay, slow down. The parts don't exist. I'm holding a pen. It feels like a part. You're sitting there. You look very much like a part of this room.
Primus calls for non-Boolean descriptions of reality. This is a bit technical, but it's absolutely key to his argument.
Boolean logic.
Yeah.
That's computer logic, right? 0 or 1, true or false, on or off.
Yes. It's the logic of distinct states. It's the logic of the Newtonian world. An electron is either here or there. A cat is either alive or dead. It has a definite independent state. It's A or it's not A.
Okay, that makes sense. That's how we experience the world.
But quantum mechanics violates Boolean logic at the most fundamental level. We have the principle of superposition. An electron, before we measure it, isn't here or there. It exists in a state where it is effectively here and D there. It's not a definite point. It's a cloud of probability.
Right. Schrodinger's cat is both alive and dead until you open the box.
Exactly. And Primus takes this mind-bending implication to its absolute limit. He argues that what we call elementary particles, electrons, quarks, all the little bits, are not little independent things that build up a universe like Legos. He says they are secondary manifestations of the whole.
Secondary manifestations. So they are effects, not causes. They're symptoms.
I think an even better analogy is the ocean. Imagine you're standing on the beach. You see a wave rise up out of the water. You can point to it. You can measure its height and its speed. You can give it a name. That is wave A.
Okay.
But does wave A exist as a separate thing, independent from the ocean?
No, of course not. You can't scoop the wave out of the water. If you take the water, the wave is gone. The wave is it's just what the ocean is doing in that particular spot at that particular time.
That is exactly what Primus is saying about reality. The universe is the ocean. It is one vast, undivided, entangled block of reality. And electrons, atoms, molecules, even you and me, are just waves on that ocean. We are patterns of the whole, not parts in the whole.
So we create the parts by looking at them.
We do. Our act of measurement, of observation, forces the wave to collapse into a particle, a seemingly separate thing. But reality itself, in its unobserved state, is one giant one.
This feels like we've wandered out of a physics lab and into a Buddhist temple. All is one. That's a very mystical-sounding idea.
It does sound mystical, but it's based on the hard mathematics and experimental results of things like the Bell inequalities and quantum entanglement. You take two particles and entangle them. You can't describe one without simultaneously describing the other. They act as a single system, even if they're on opposite sides of the galaxy.
Right, the spooky action at a distance.
That's it. And Primus just says, apply that principle to everything. The entire universe is one single, entangled quantum state.
Okay, my brain hurts, but I think I'm following. So the universe is one giant ocean. How does this help us with the Incarnation? How does this solve the paradox of God versus man?
Remember the interaction problem, the whole headache of Cartesian dualism? How do you glue spirit substance to matter substance?
The oil and water that won't mix.
Primus says, there is no oil and water. There are no two separate substances to begin with. There is only the ocean. And he suggests we replace the concept of dualism with the quantum concept of complementarity.
Complementarity, that's a term from Niels Bohr, one of the founders of quantum mechanics.
Yes. Bohr pointed out that in quantum physics, light can behave like a particle, a localized little packet. But it can also behave like a wave, spread out across space. Those two descriptions seem contradictory, but they are both true. They are complementary descriptions of the same underlying reality.
So it's not particle or wave, it's particle and D wave.
Depending on how you look at it. And Primus argues that mind and matter, or for our purposes, divine and human, aren't two different stuffs fighting for space in the universe. They are two complementary ways of looking at the same single holistic reality.
So applying this to the person of Jesus.
If Primus is right, the entire substance problem just evaporates. We don't need to explain how divine substance attached itself to human substance because deep down, ontologically, there is no fundamental separation.
So Jesus isn't a hybrid. He isn't a Frankenstein monster of God parts stitched onto man parts.
No. He is a single, unified reality, a wave on the ocean of being that, depending on how you look, exhibits both divine and human properties. That the tension isn't ontological. It's not a contradiction in the structure of reality. The tension is epistemological. It's in our limited perspective in the glasses we're wearing.
That is incredibly elegant. It really is. It shifts the problem from this is a physical impossibility to our way of seeing is too simple.
It creates a model where the Incarnation isn't a violation of nature, because nature itself is capable of this kind of complementarity. It's capable of being both localized and particular, a particle, and universal and spread out, a wave.
But I have to play the skeptic here for a moment. Prius's view, this one ocean idea, is pretty radical. It seems to imply that individual things, individual people, are ultimately an illusion. I feel like an individual. I feel like I exist separately from you.
And that is a very valid critique. Some theologians worry that Primus's holism leads to something called monism, the idea that God and the world are just the same undifferentiated soup, and that's not Orthodox Christianity.
Right. Most theology wants God to be distinct from his creation, even if he is intimately present within it. You don't want to say that the tree outside is literally God.
Exactly. So Lawson, acknowledging this potential problem, gives us a second option, a second path through the quantum woods. This one comes from another philosopher, Michael Esfeld.
Okay, so this is section 5. Esfeld and what Lawson calls a metaphysics of relations. How is this different from the big ocean?
Esfeld is a bit more moderate. He allows that parts, or at least distinct things, exist. He's not saying the universe is just one undifferentiated blob, but he radically challenges what he calls the metaphysics of individuals.
The metaphysics of individuals. That sounds like just how we normally think about things.
Yeah. It is. It's our default setting. It's the idea that things have intrinsic properties. Imagine a red billiard ball. We say it is round, it is red, it has a mass of 160 grams. Those properties belong to the ball itself. They're inside the ball, part of its definition. It carries them around in its own little backpack.
Right. And if I took that ball to the other side of the universe and put it in a dark room, it would still be red and round and have that same mass.
That's the classical assumption. But Esfeld says quantum mechanics, especially entanglement, completely destroys that assumption. Entanglement shows us that particles often don't have definite properties until they interact with something else. Their identity is defined by their relationship to other particles.
So they don't have backpacks full of properties.
No. He proposes a metaphysics of relations. He argues that at the most fundamental level, the only thing that might actually exist is relation.
Wait, only relations. How can you have a relationship without things to relate?
Yeah.
That sounds like the grin without the Cheshire cat.
It is a total brain bender. But think of it this way. Think of a chess game. Take the king. What makes that carved piece of wood a king?
Well, the cross on top, the shape, its physical property.
No. I could play chess with a bottle cap and call it the king. What makes it a king is the rules. It's the fact that if it gets trapped, the game ends. It's the fact that it moves one square at a time in any direction. Its entire identity as king is defined by its relationship to the queen, the pawns, and the board.
So if you took the king off the board and put it in a vacuum by itself,
It ceases to be a king. It's just a shaped piece of wood. Its kingness is a purely relational property, not an intrinsic one. Esveld is suggesting that the universe is much more like a chessboard than a bucket of billiard balls, electrons, atoms, maybe even people. We are defined by our connections, not by our isolated essences.
identity is relational.
There is no a priori argument that excludes a metaphysics of relations. That's the key quote Lawson pulls from Esveld. Science doesn't forbid this way of seeing.
Okay, let's bring us back to theology. Because this sounds like it solves the two natures problem of Jesus in a completely different way from Primus.
It does. Traditional theology gets stuck on lists. We make a list of God traits, omnipotence, omniscience, eternity. Then we make a list of human traits, weakness, ignorance, mortality. And then we try to jam them into one person and say, look, the lists don't match. The stats are incompatible. Paradox.
It's like trying to merge two characters in a video game with conflicting stats. The code just crashes.
Exactly. But Esveld's model lets us ask a different question. Instead of asking what intrinsic properties Jesus has, we asked what relationships define him. Who is the Son of God in Christian theology?
Well, in the Bible, he is the one who comes from the Father. He is the beloved Son in whom the Father is well pleased. His identity is defined by that relationship.
Precisely. He is defined by his perfect relationship to the Father. Now, who is Jesus of Nazareth?
He is the Son of Mary. He is the friend of Peter and John. He's the teacher of the disciples, the savior of humanity.
He is defined by his relationships to us, to humanity. Esveld's model suggests that personhood, what theologians call hypostasis, is fundamentally a locus of relationships.
A nexus, a point where different connections meet.
Yes. So the question is no longer, how can one substance have contradictory properties? The question becomes, can one person stand as the nexus of a perfect relationship to God, divinity, and a perfect relationship to humanity?
And the answer to that is yes, because those aren't competing lists of stats. They were different directions of connection, different sets of relations, centered on one person.
Bingo. This removes the need for a substance explanation entirely. We stop asking, what is he made of? And we start asking, who is he connected to?
That feels surprisingly intuitive. I mean, even for us as humans, I am a father to my kids, a husband to my wife, a son to my parents, a host to you, the listener. I am different things in different relations, but I'm still one person.
Exactly. It creates a third way between the old, tired options of dualism and reductionism. It's not a ghost in a machine. It's not just a machine. It's a nexus of relationships.
And it fits the biblical narrative so much better than all that Greek philosophical talk about substance. The Bible is all about covenant. It's all about relationship between God and his people.
It is. And this brings us to the final section, section 6, the so what. Why does any of this matter? We've gone through Boolean logic, superposition, entanglement, and ontology. Does this actually help someone's faith, or is it just a clever intellectual game?
Or worse, is it just a new version of the God of the gaps?
Yeah.
Lawson warns about that, right?
He does, and this is absolutely crucial. We must not say quantum mechanics is weird and spooky. God is weird and spooky, therefore quantum mechanics proves God. That is lazy and dangerous. That is the God of the gaps, just hiding God in the bits of science we don't understand yet.
Because eventually, science will understand those gaps better, and then your God gets squeezed out and disappears.
Exactly. Lawson is not offering a proof. He is very clear on this. He is offering an analogy. He is offering a model of coherence.
What's the difference between a proof and coherence?
A proof forces you to believe through logic. Coherence just shows that your belief isn't illogical. It opens the door. Lawson is arguing that if the deep structure of reality is holistic, like Primus says, or relational, like Esveld says, then the core Christian concept of immanence, the idea of God being present within the world, is no longer a physical impossibility.
It removes the big no-entry sign that Newton and Descartes put up on the door to the physical universe.
Yes. If the world was a machine, God entering it breaks the gears. But if the world is an interconnected web of relations, if nature itself is holistic and non-reductionist, then a God who enters that nature is simply participating in the reality he created. He isn't fighting against it or breaking its rules. He's embodying its deepest rule.
This connects back to Torrance's shared bench. It shows that the incarnation isn't proven by physics, but it is analogically comparable to the structure of the universe as described by physics.
Right. It validates the instinct of faith. It tells the believer, you aren't crazy for believing this. The pattern of your belief in a God-man fits the deep pattern of reality itself.
And it helps with some specific theological potholes, too. We should probably just briefly mention kenosis and docetism.
Briefly, yes. Kenosis is the theory that for Jesus to become human, he had to sort of empty himself of his divinity. He had to leave his superpowers, his omniscience, at the door of heaven before coming to earth.
Which makes perfect sense in a Newtonian substance-based world. You can't fit a gallon of divine substance into a pint glass of human substance. Something has to be poured out.
But in a holistic world where the whole is present in every part, like the entire ocean is expressed in one wave, you don't need to empty anything. The fullness of God can be present in the specific, localized pattern of a human life without contradiction.
And docetism, what's that?
That's the opposite error. It's the ancient heresy that Jesus was a hologram, that matter is too dirty or lowly for God to actually touch, so he just seemed to be human. He was a divine phantom.
So quantum holism says matter isn't dirty or separate from the divine.
Exactly. In this view, matter is just the condensed energy of the universe. It's all part of the same essential reality. So the incarnation, far from avoiding matter, becomes the ultimate validation of the physical world. It's God saying, this physical stuff is good. It is so good, in fact, that I'm going to wear it.
Wow, that is a profound shift. It really moves us from a war between science and faith to a shared conversation about the very mystery of being itself.
It does. It puts them back on the same bench.
We have covered an immense amount of ground. Let's try to summarize this entire journey before we hit the final thought.
Sure, let's trace the argument. We started with what looked like a hard paradox. How can God be man? It looked like a logical impossibility, a square circle.
But we realized that feeling of impossibility was based on the Newtonian trap. The idea that the world is made of separate, hard substances, dualism, and follows strict, closed mechanical laws that seem to lock God out of his own universe.
Then we adopted the framework of critical realism. We had to be humble and admit that our scientific theories are maps, not the actual territory. This gave us the intellectual wiggle room to explore new maps.
And the new map we looked at was quantum physics. We explored Primus's radical quantum holism, the idea that the universe is one giant ocean, and all separation is, in some sense, an illusion created by our observation.
Which completely solved the old interaction problem by removing the artificial barrier between the substance of spirit and the substance of matter.
And for those uncomfortable with that level of mysticism, we looked at Esfeld's Metaphysics of Relations, the idea that identity isn't defined by a list of internal properties, but by external connections.
Which allowed us to see Jesus not as a hybrid of incompatible parts, but as a single person defined by his unique dual relationships to both God and man.
Leading us to the final conclusion. Science and theology don't have to be at war. They can sit on the shared bench looking at a universe that is far more mysterious, interconnected, and relational than we ever thought possible.
A universe that is, as you said at the start, detailed and deep.
Exactly. Now, you promised me a final provocative thought, something to keep us up at night chewing on this.
I did, and it goes back to Esfeld and his Metaphysics of Relations. Remember his claim? At the deepest, most fundamental level, reality is relational. There are no solitary, self-contained individuals. There are only nodes in a web of connections.
Right. The chess pieces only have meaning because of the board and the other pieces.
Well, think about the classical Christian definition of God. Not just the incarnation that we've been talking about, but the very nature of God himself. The Trinity.
Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
For 2,000 years, Christianity has claimed that God, in God's own being, is not a solitary individual. God is not a monad. God is a community. God is relationship. Love requires a lover, a beloved, and the love that flows between them. The very essence of God is relational.
So God is fundamentally relational, not individual.
For centuries, people, especially in the modern West, have thought the Trinity is just a confusing, illogical bit of math. How can 3 be 1? It seemed like a weird exception to the rule that everything is, at bottom, an individual.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
But what if Esfeld is right? What if the physical universe is fundamentally relational? What if electrons and atoms and galaxies only exist and have identity through their connections to everything else?
You're saying the universe looks a lot like the Trinity.
I'm asking the question, does the deep structure of the physical world mirror the deep structure of its creator? Is the universe relational because God is relational?
That represents a complete inversion of how we usually think. We assume individualism is the default, the hard reality, and Trinity or relationship is the weird, soft, metaphorical exception.
And Lawson's case study, by bringing quantum physics to the table, suggests that maybe we've had it completely backward. Maybe relationship is the ultimate reality, all the way up and all the way down, and our modern obsession with the isolated individual. Maybe that's the illusion.
That is a beautiful place to land. So for everyone listening, next time you look at a wave crashing on the shore or a chessboard, or even just look in the mirror, remember, you might not be a lonely Lego brick in a random box. You might be a wave in an infinite ocean of relationship. Thanks for diving deep with us.
Until next time, keep asking questions.